this looks like a full house, and I'm not surprised at all, given the theme of our discussion. As we said, cryptocurrencies and bitcoins, boom or bust. So let me, without any further ado, bring on board the rest of the panelists and speakers who I'm sure are going to make the rest of the session very engaging. Doug Van Kwakabiki, he is the managing partner at BNext and founder Alp Ventures. Everyone, a round of applause, please. We also have Robin Jones, COO, Public Market. Thank you, Robin, for joining in today. Sanjay Mehta as well. And Manshu Agarwal, co-founder and CEO at Ponder, will be joining in on stage. Thank you for being with us. Asha Jadeja is with us as well on the panel. So thank you all for joining in today. Well, if you don't know what a Bitcoin or cryptocurrency is, I'd say you're living under a rock. But, you know, sometimes when you think about Bitcoins, I think the tale about how it's created money almost seems like fiction. But it is actually the most well-known digital currency in use today. In fact, if you think about the year 2010, someone decided to sell their Bitcoins to purchase 2 pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoins. And I hope that pizza was damn good, because if he'd held on to those Bitcoins, he would be worth millions of dollars. So let's, without any further ado, get that discussion going. And Doug, I'd like to start off with you. For the traditional investor, say someone like me, just I think the idea that it's not backed by anything, it's not regulated by anyone, that scares off many people. Your views and how you'd like to perhaps change my notion?
I think like when we're talking about cryptocurrencies as an asset class, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. So like regulators in the world have asked me like, what are we doing about this mania, right? I obviously cannot comment on that, but I think it's a more fundamental question on the technology side that I get excited about and that I'm very long on, and I think it's a boom, and it's a very, very, very long boom. With regards to the fluctuations on the individual prices, I don't want to give any financial advice or comment on that.
Fair enough. Sanjay, I would just like to get some comments from you, because you seem to be fairly bullish on the idea of cryptocurrencies, but a bit skeptical on the Bitcoin boom. Can you elaborate with some examples?
If you look into Bitcoin, I would consider Bitcoin as the first global bank without branches, without employees, no corporations, no government controlling, and serves like a bank. I mean, anything today you want to do a transaction, it requires permission. If I swipe a credit card, bank authorizes. If I give a check, everything requires permission. This is the first time we are having a free society where there is a permissionless business which is happening across. If I have to transfer value at scale, right? We have been transferring information at scale. This is first time we are transferring value at scale, which is happening with Bitcoin, and the underlying protocol or the technology is blockchain. So Bitcoin is the first proof of concept, which is validated on the payment side, and we will see many use cases emerging out of the blockchain.
Interesting view, but I'm going to take forward, Asha, a point that Doug made. He said he's very, very long on the overall concept. If you would like to give us your views on how it's really going to change businesses and industries and the way things are working right now.
I think for me, I don't see any major relevance for Bitcoins or the cryptocurrency right now in the business world so much as I see it in the world of governance, and that's where it's going to have the maximum bang for the buck. And I see entire nation states, maybe even a decade from now, entire nation states moving to the blockchain platform, because that's where it's going to be fully transparent. All transactions are accountable. We'll be able to move functions that just like Dubai has done right now. The UAE government is moving entire government onto blockchain right now. And I'm hoping that similarly our state governments or even municipal governments will start doing that as a test case. That's where I see the maximum evolution happening in the blockchain space. Not so much in the business space, because the market is not yet prepared to deal with the kind of shocks that cryptocurrency is still going to keep hitting us with.
And Rajan, I saw you nodding. Do you agree with that? Because she did bring up a valid point. As of now, perhaps businesses aren't ready for it. I'd request you to pass the mic on. And today there was an interesting article as well that said that Bitcoins can make the agricultural supply chain more secure, more transparent. How do you see it affecting some of these industries?
Yeah, so I want to start with the first premise that you said for the panels. I raised my hand for both boom and bust. I said Bitcoin is both a boom as well as a bust. But if you talk about boom and bust, you can pretty much say the same thing for every technology. Car was a boom and bust, railroad was a boom and bust, optical fiber was a boom and bust, broadband was a boom and bust, internet was a boom and bust. So many venture capitalists have come to realize that anything which is very foundational technology, it goes through a cycle of both boom and bust. Initially, there is a huge boom. In fact, there are venture capitalists like Fred Wilson of Union Square Venture Capital, as well as Mark Anderson, who refer to an economist who's come up with this framework called Carlotto Perez, where she says that every technology goes through about 5 stages, 2 phases: disruption, then an old paradigm is fighting with the new paradigm. After that, a lot of financiers come in. They pour a lot of money. There is frenzy. People ask this question: is it a boom or bust? And after that, regulators come in, and then everybody gets disillusioned. And then there is a huge trough, right? The valley kind of caves. And after that, what is left? There's a lot of overcapacity built in, and only engineers are left. And after engineers are left, they go forward and build the stuff. And this is something Asha has personally witnessed. Asha is one of the first angel investor who invested in Google, and she's seen through this on the internet. And that's the reason I was nodding with Asha, saying that she's experienced this whole frenzy of how technology initially becomes a boom, then it goes bust, and then afterwards when developers
But
come
if
in.
I may come in there, given that you brought up the point about the internet, of course it's a boom and a bust, but I think the pros outweigh the cons. Would you say the same for Bitcoins, cryptocurrencies?
Sure. So, my view on that would be, what is your time scale? If your time scale is 2 years, maybe, if the time scale was between 98 and 2000, yes, the pros outweigh. But if your time scale was 98 to 2008, and this is where Asha made a lot of her investment returns, is phenomenal, boom in that sense. So this question will depend on how long are you looking at the horizon. And Bitcoin is only about 10 years. And something like a car technology took 30 years. I mean, in 1929, we were having these questions about, should we introduce car into society because it is killing so many people? There were no traffic signals. And that
idea
came
is,
in.
I mean, while he's talking about, you can't time markets, right? It's all about timing. What he's talking about, saying that, you wait across, what's your horizon? Idea here is, what is the opportunity right now, right there for us? Is it
So
available?
is there opportunity?
Oh, absolutely. There is an opportunity. There are quite a lot of decentralized apps which are getting built across. There's a huge story which is, and we heard Tim Draper talking about it. Everything is set to disrupt, from Facebook, Uber, what is existing right now. There will be complete decentralization. Everything today exists with a central point of failure. Even countries are failing, right? And that's where we have seen across countries like Zimbabwe adopting Bitcoin as the payment. That is becoming like a crisis currency. So it's there, it's happening.
Okay, I have some points that I will counter, but Manju would like to get you in. First, I think you should tell the audience a little bit about what you do, because I found it fairly interesting. And talk to us about, your views on Bitcoins. Were you also raising both your hands for boom or bust?
I was doing boom and bust, for sure. But let me start to just tell a little bit about my background. So I'm an entrepreneur. I have a company called Ponder, which is based in the US, in Los Angeles, and we're just launching in India. And it's a platform for making introductions at scale. We're using game mechanics and financial rewards to make everybody a matchmaker. For matchmaking for romance, for jobs, for business purposes. We're trying to make everywhere where social investment, social capital, and human judgment can make better connections between people. That's what we're trying to do. Going back to the topic of Bitcoin and boom or bust. First of all, I think we have to separate currencies from the blockchain. Right? I think that's a clear distinction that we have to make. There's a lot of emphasis on currencies, and Bitcoin takes all the limelight. But really, Bitcoin's only one part, and I'd argue that it's actually a relatively small part of the wider paradigm shift that we're experiencing by blockchain. Blockchain, without a shadow of a doubt, is the biggest thing since the internet. Let me repeat. Blockchain is the biggest thing, without a doubt, since the internet. And possibly, it can change business practices bigger than the internet could. The internet was primarily, it revolutionized e-commerce. It revolutionized certain things which were fundamentally about connectivity. The blockchain can revolutionize anywhere where a set of multiple parties need to create trust between each other.
How can you live without token? I mean, you're
I
talking
agree.
about blockchain and you're not talking about
It's
token
like
or crypto.
HTTP
Sure,
without
no,
TCP/IP.
and the token is the root to that, right? The token is key.
Token, I mean, unless tokens are there, how would you work on the blockchain?
No, absolutely. And I'm not saying that the tokens are not needed. Tokens are key to the blockchain. But what I'm saying is just the payment basis. Bitcoin is for payments, the utility is for payments. But there are a lot of utilities for tokens which are nothing to do necessarily with payments. That's what I just want to make, that distinction between payments, which is for sure, that's the reason why people started to get into the blockchain because of Bitcoin.
Right.
But most decentralized apps are not about payments. They're about other things, and they utilize the blockchain as the means to make themselves decentralized.
Asha, I want to come to you, but I'd like to get in some perspective from Robin as well. And Robin, what are your thoughts on this debate?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the things that's really fundamentally important to understand as a blockchain entrepreneur, as a blockchain investor, is that it really is the potential to allow for true decentralization of markets that have basically suffered under monopoly powers. And so I thought your point about the internet was wonderful, that it did solve the problem of communication. It facilitated many industries, but the problem is that the business practices within those industries are back to business as usual, where one or two companies basically amass all of the power, become a middleman, and extract all the value out of that ecosystem. And so I think that the potential that we see at public market is in the e-commerce space. There is one player that basically dominates that space, and it is incredibly difficult to compete as a vendor in that space now unless you have massive economies of scale. And so by decentralizing e-commerce and eliminating those extortionist commissions that are charged, you're able to basically innovate in the market, and both the buyers and the sellers win. And that's really the rationale for tokenizing that space, is to be able to create an entirely new business model for something that we're all very familiar with. The other point I wanted to make, and it's back to your point, we've had some discussion about, well, it's maybe a little early in its infancy and hard for your average citizen to understand. And I think that some of the value of the application is to try to preserve as much of the typical user behavior as you can, make the user experience as similar as you can. For example, don't require everyone to spend cryptocurrency to buy goods and services, but that doesn't mean you can't tokenize that network. And so I think that there's a way to smooth the transition so that it isn't as big of a bust.
I actually want to have a small comment on something that I think is, just for the sake of the audience, there are certain shortcuts sometimes to understanding the system, a new beast like an internet kind of an entity that is emerging right now. It's going to be a big shakeout. I think first thing I would recommend for the audience, for the investors, for potential startups here is to really get up to speed with the space, which means read up about everything that's internet, blockchain, it's currencies, it's cryptocurrency, it's tokenization, it's consensus building, decentralization, and edgeworks. First of all, get really familiar with it. And another shortcut that I recommend for youngsters in the audience here who are trying to do a startup in this space is follow everything that Naval Ravikant is saying as a shortcut. I mean, that he has done so much thinking into it and has put out so many videos on this and so much information on this. It's beautifully thought out, well filtered. And another person to watch is actually our own Rajan sitting right here.
So I just wanted to add that any entrepreneur or any investor that gets into blockchain, Bitcoin, I say that you have to understand it at three levels. One is the Bhajan level, the Gita level, and the Veda level. To translate it into English, it means metaphor, mental models, and of true first principles thinking. Elon Musk thinks at first principles level. Naval Ravikant is a Veda thinker, but he's able to bring it all the way to metaphor levels. And most of the debates that we end up having is because we understood a poor metaphor. And since this is a technology which doesn't have any analog in the past, we are like blind men trying to figure out how does the elephant shape look like.
What would be your view on whether or not bitcoins or cryptocurrencies would act or enable as a replacement to actual government-controlled centralized money?
How do you tell an AI to open up a bank account and pay tax on its output?
Absolutely.
right?
Actually,
So I think that's the answer, ultimately.
for
I
me,
think they're
I mean,
not
as far as I
mutually
go.
exclusive. They
So
will
the jury's
coexist.
still out as to whether
Yeah.
it would
Well,
do that,
I think
Asha?
way too early to judge, but like, yeah.
The whole world is going to be moving to blockchain. Whether we like it or not, it's going to be happening. But a poor country like India right now, we are not yet there in terms of having the freedom and having the kind of economic muscle power yet to be experimenting and getting too adventurous right now. So let's watch a little bit as to what's happening in Europe and even in the US and how things shake out a little bit before we get into it.
My perspective here would be purely saying that people over the time will lose faith in government fiat and government money, and they will believe into corporations who would be issuing their own tokens and money.
So no one's worried that, as some people say, that it could become the new Swiss bank accounts?
This will be the money which government can't demonetize.
Good one.
There
Go
was,
ahead.
there's that famous phrase that software is eating the world, and now tokens are eating the world. And so you can imagine a situation, and it's not even just imagine, it is happening, where everything that you do, every aspect, whether you go into Starbucks or whether you go and take an Uber, everything will revolve around these currencies, these tokens. And it's a question, and then there'll be infrastructure which helps you move around in those tokens, so the user experience will be much better. It's complicated. It scares people. Actually, just that whole customer experience side of how do I manage these currencies? How do I change them? We're worried about doing online banking because of security risks. We're in the same stage now where people are scared. All right, how is all of this going to pan out? But like any time you have brilliant minds being put onto a problem, those problems will be solved.
When you talk to anyone, who is bullish, like you meet me, I'll say the world will change. It looks like fiction, but things are really working in the background. We will see world Uber without Uber, Facebook without Facebook very soon, right? Where this is completely decentralized, permissionless. Bitcoin has proved the concept of trustless ledger. Ethereum proved us of the smart contracts, and now we are heading towards smart business.
And what about the fact that, as of now, it's a bubble? So which side are you on?
No, I see everything. There is always going to be a hype. Now, you call this bubble or
Less a currency and more highly volatile commodity.
It is going to be because people are entering. There is supply demand. We don't have much of knowing how the regulation works across. But the whole focus is underlying: is this solving a problem? Yes, it is solving a large set of problems. Today, governments are printing more and more money. There is unlimited supply of money for every country. Bitcoin or, if you look at those kind of currency are driven by algorithm. They've got fixed amount of supplies, public ledger which cannot be tampered with. There are so many. In digital world, if you cannot copy anything, it's valuable.
Right.
May I briefly, not intervene, but maybe add that we're talking so much about currency. It's not a currency. It's a unit of account matched with a belief system. And if you break down blockchain, tokenization, distribution, those are the big building blocks of what we're seeing at the moment. Blockchain is trust, right? And taper-proof trust, i.e. there's no central government instance that can, undo it. But to create taper-proof trust, you have to somehow incentivize and create behavior, and that's where it gets extremely interesting from a mental model point of view, to incentivize a protocol layer, essentially, that's consensus-driven, to agree a rule book, not only now, because HTTP was designed by a bunch of scientists, but then there was no legacy to it. There was no incentive to continue working and developing on it. And that's what tokenization does, and that's what I meant earlier when I said, you have blockchain, that's great, but that's half the, if not less, the equation. And then you need distribution. Now the distribution actually is preempting of, not preempting, but it's front-loading adoption, right? It's front-loading adoption for an eventual use case. Obviously, there are a lot of question marks around whether that use case will fly or not, and there's a lot of risk, and we all know this. And this is a 98 déjà vu, but an eye-opening, I had a few eye-opening experiences where for me, it was clear that this is not gonna go away. Number one, I meant money. No, I'm kidding. Number one, I attended a developer garage very early with a gentleman called Vitalik Buterin, who's the mentor behind Ethereum. And there were a bunch of kids, and it reminded me of myself when I was an entrepreneur at sort of the first, whatever, Facebook developer garages. Before that, the energy and the dedication that extremely smart young people are working towards changing something and proving, call it the system or the status quo, something wrong because they see something fundamental in this technology that will change the world. So the belief system is there, number one. Number two, we had massive lockdowns on cryptocurrencies, bans, all that stuff, right? And if you look sort of at the distribution of trading activity, ICO activity, last year, that was largely China-driven, and then the ban hit, but the market did not break. And I think that was fundamental. So like whatever happens from here on out, there will always be adoption on the edges of the universe, whether it's Zimbabwe, Venezuela, or whatever. And I'll leave it at that.
So I'm afraid since we're short of time, let's do a quick rapid fire. So this is just a one answer, sort of a quick, you can't take time to think. I'm going to come to you first, Rajan. The biggest risk to Bitcoin is? Regulatory.
Finding Satoshi.
That's one of my questions. Who do you think the creator
Serious,
is?
that was the first master stroke that this thing still exists.
Robin, Bitcoins will be worth XXX in 2020.
2020. Oh, I think it's going to rationalize some. So I think Bitcoins will be closer to 1,000, 2,000.
Sanjay, when I say cryptocurrency, you think?
Scale. It's like
Scaling.
scale.
Got it. Okay. If I had, 10,000 Bitcoins today, I would. Manshu?
I'm not giving any financial advice, so let me just state that right straight away.
Disclaimer.
But I'd say this is a really interesting opportunity to invest in some decentralized apps. I think this is a huge opportunity. I am actually doing an ICO. If anybody is interested, I think this is a revolutionary time for getting new ways of financing and also getting customers before you've even created the product. And more so, probably the third most important point, you get more engaged customers because those customers are also incentivized to improve your ecosystem and not just take on an individual basis.
Okay, Asha, the next big thing after Bitcoins and cryptocurrencies is?
Nothing, just that.
Just this.
Just Bitcoins and blockchain.
And if you haven't read about Bitcoins, you are?
I think
Not
I
in
mean,
the
then you
rabbit hole.
might as well wrap up.
I didn't get that, sorry.
You didn't go down the rabbit hole yet. But if you
You're
will.
an
I
ostrich with your head in the sand.
I actually think you're dead because this is really the most exciting time in history where everything is becoming decentralized. Power is going to be really in the hands of people. I mean, it sounds like George Orwell's 1984 or something, but this is really is a historic moment right now.
I think the current status quo is George Orwell. So if you look at the centralization in GAFA, so GAFA, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, it's all centralized data silos, right? You look at the extreme in China, and I'll keep it very short.
I'm getting death glares, that's
credit
all.
sesame, like a government score, essentially, that forces all digital players to feed into that score. You become a glass citizen, and if you did something wrong or your ancestors did something wrong, you're excluded from society, right? So, and that's a huge privacy concern that I think blockchain plus can solve.
I would say that means we've covered every aspect, and thank you all for joining in today.
Thank you, guys. Thanks
Thank
a
you
lot.
for being with us today.